Good evening, everyone. We are meeting again in our lecture series. We have been hosting this lecture series since October 2020, and we are in the 34th lecture of webinar series of Archaeological Sciences Center, IIT Gandhinagar. And today we have with us one of the eminent scholars who has worked extensively in the Western Indian caves, Professor Y.S. Alone from Jawaharlal Nehru University. And he will be enlightening us about some of the aspects about Ajanta chronology. Because I have also worked for a few years at Aurangabad, so I know there's a lot of controversy issue. There's a longer version, shorter version. So today I think we will have a balanced view and also try to understand how the chronology of Ajanta Caves can be fixed. Now I'll ask my student Unka to introduce the speaker, then he can take over. Unka?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 34th lecture of the ASC webinar series. For today's webinar, Professor Alone will be delivering the talk on Ajanta Caves, understanding its chronology. So before he starts, I would like to briefly introduce him and thank him for his time today. Professor Alone is currently working at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And prior to this, he has held positions at the Kurukshetra University, Department of Fine Arts, and the Department of Archaeology at Deccan College Postgraduate Research Institute in Pune. His research contribution has always offered directions to the disciplinary paradigm of art history and social sciences. His research interests include ancient Indian art, Buddhist art, modern Indian art, and popular visual culture, neo-Buddhist visual culture, photography, philosophy, as well as general social sciences. Thank you once again for your time, Professor Alone. I now request you to please deliver the talk.
Thank you, Prabhakar. Thank you, and thanks to his team. Thanks for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to speak before an exclusive gathering. And I hope I make some sense. So I'll start my presentation straight away. When I make this whole idea of chronology, when I talk about a whole idea of chronology, indeed, one has to take into account the historiography that has been produced over a period of time. And Ajanta is such a complex site, I must say, and that is why Deshpande ji long ago said that it is an enigma of art historians. And it is true. Once you get absorbed into caves, it indeed becomes an enigma. And also, when one tries to go into the details and study phase by phase, it becomes far more challenging rather than just seeing the cave and making appreciation. So it has a long history. And during colonial time, it was discovered. Shanza talks about one site in his travel account, and that is generally gets identified with with Ajanta, whereas Suraj Pandit would like to identify that description with Kanheri. So I cannot give any judgment on that, but this is how it has been there so far, and one has to verify all those claims very systematically. Some of the important works that have been produced over a period of time by on Ajanta are mainly the works by Burgess, Deshpande, Yazdani, Goetz, Tilakramrish, then Vidya Dehejia, Nagaraju, Sheila Weiner, Walter Spink, Dhaudikar, Gupte and B.D. Mahajan, R.S. Gupte and B.D. Mahajan, then Shingloff and Monica Zin. These are some of the important set of scholars who have produced a substantial work on Ajanta and have really changed our understanding of Ajanta. Important interventions and observations with regard to Ajanta's later phase of activities, you will notice that it is the work of mainly the work of Jamkedkar ji, Ratan Parimusar, Professor Deepak Karnal, Shivji Panikar, and Brahmananda Deshpande. They have contributed immensely. So, in various forms, through the articles or through, like A.P. Jamkedkar produced a small monogram as a part of the guidebook. Then content analysis and contestations, you can also see how Mina Talim has made it. And it is extremely problematic, Mina Talim's work. I mean, there is sweeping generalization. There is absolutely no involvement in the analysis of painting. Rather, it is just an account which is produced with the very generic kind of an understanding. And then I must say that there are some Marathi authors who have really, I mean, there are certain seriousness in their writings, mainly Radhika Tipre and Ramananta Thatte. So Thatte's book is an interesting account because he worked as an artist there and retired there, and then he produced a small book in Marathi, which is very interesting to read. And there are interesting insights when it comes to the formal aspects of the painting. And then we have religion, which has been mainly studied by Gindalian aim through the set of inscriptional evidences that are available in the entire Western Deccan. And then later on, Richard Cohen has produced a very good work on the religious aspects of Ajanta and other site. However, I must say that we still need to do number of things, because the number of connections that have been seen within the region and outside region, they need to be re-examined further and see how we can, because we cannot see anything in vacuum. And then recent works by Rajesh Singh, which mostly derived from what Spink and Chingloff has done. And then there are many publications on some interesting romantic admirations for Ajanta paintings that does not go beyond exoticism and the works carried out by earlier scholars. So there is a lot of romantic admiration for Ajanta. And the real problem comes as far as chronology is concerned with regarding to the Mahayana phase. And Burgess had suggested the caves that he divided into two groups. And one group he divided mainly consisting of cave number 6, 7, 8, and 50 to 20 from 5th century CE or AD to the end of 6th century CE. And whereas cave 1 to 5 and 21 to 28, he made them into another group, which he dated beyond late 5th century CE. So this is the typological and decorative mainly based on the typological and decorative variations. Whereas Yazdani's work is a one which is very comprehensive in the context of the content analysis, and also he suggested certain chronological span which start from 5th century CE to 6th century CE, and accordingly he divided the groups of the caves. So I'm not going to go and read everything. It's there on the screen, and you yourself can see as to how he made those divisions of the caves. In the field of epigraphy, we have a very important contribution by Burgess, Buehler, Indraji, and then further we have John Allen and P.N. Chakravarti who have worked on the painted inscriptions. And P.N. Chakravarti assigned the painted inscriptions to 5th and 6th centuries AD on the paleographic grounds, whereas D.C. Sarkar carried out the reading of inscription in cave number 4. And then Mirashi made a lot of corrections in the readings of cave number 16 and 17 and 20, along with Gatotkacha inscriptions, which in that book on Vakataka inscriptions published by Archaeological Survey of India. Then few inscriptions were noted by Walter Spink and Suresh Vasantzada in cave number 10, 11, 16, and cave 22. And these include engraved and painted inscriptions and have been translated by M.K. Dhawlikar in an article. Then we have works of Stella Kramrisch, who has used Chitra Sutra to explain the technical aspects of the painting, whereas Charles Fabry's article is more an appreciation rather than any art historical analysis. Now, I just wish to talk about M.N. Deshpande's important contribution. He is the one who contributed on the early phase as well as on the later phase of Ajanta. And made um, and made a fantastic analysis. And he admits that it is something which is very difficult while delivering a keynote address. He said that this happened in Baroda when the seminar on Ajanta was conducted by Professor Ratan Parimu in the Department of Art, History and Aesthetics, MS University, Baroda. So that time he said, he said, I took so much of time to draft a keynote address and I couldn't draft. It was such a daunting task, very difficult task for me. And I typed and destroyed the manuscript. I typed and destroyed the manuscript. So he did it some 4 or 5 times. And finally, he decided not to write and speak, and then made his lectures and spoke extensively in that seminar, which is a very, very, very important, and unfortunately we have not recorded it. And what he spoke and what he wrote are little different. I mean, I must say, because I was the one who there were a couple of us who were witness to it, and I can say that what has been written and what he spoke are little different. Then we have Walter Spink, who has worked on Ajanta since 1952 till his death, and a very interesting one. And he accepted first Mirash's dating, who assigned Harishena to 475 to 500 AD, and then he changed the entire date, and then also believed the account in Dashakumara Charitam as the most authentic one because Mirashi had accepted. And so Spink also accepted it, and without cross-examining anything, that becomes hugely problematic. And he reduced the development of Ajanta like from 462 CE to 478 or some 495 CE. That is what the standard date provided by Walter Spink. And many people, I mean, the understanding of Ajanta is so much dominated by this, by what Walter Spink has produced, and it is extremely problematic. Extremely problematic. It is not that I'm opposing Spink just for the sake of opposing, but I'm contesting that, and he never responded to my contestations. That's the whole trouble. While I was in China as ICC chair visiting professor in Shenzhen University, so he wrote me, I understand what you are saying, but even then I request you to rethink. So this is the kind of an email he would write to me, and but could never explain to what I critiqued in my articles and also in my book, and even on the in the lecture forums or in the seminars and all. So the Spink would never responded, and Spink could never do that. Of course, he is no more. But I must say that I lost my academic opponent. He was my academic opponent. And at the same time, I had a great respect for him because he is one person who worked throughout his life on Ajanta and really had a fantastic insights, but he could not really take it forward and make a larger picture of Ajanta, and he made it into a reductionist mode. He became extremely reductionist. So this is what, apart from these early caves, Walter Spink spoke on almost all the caves, and this is how, like according to him, that the later phase, mainly at caves 1 to 8 and 11 and 14 to 27 were excavated in the span of 20 years, mainly during the reign of Vakata King Harishen, that is 467 or 68 to 477 or 478. That is how he linked everything to the political chronology of a king, and use the framework of rise and fall. So that's a very typical typified framework that has been used over a period of time in the historical analysis. Now let me also add that each cave had a separate entrance, and these entrances were from the riverbed, and one has to, you cannot think of having a cave from 1 to 26 the way we travel, the way the pathway is there for for us to move from one place to another place, one cave to another place. Now, we also have to see the Trikutaka who are dated to 5th century C, and their dating is based on the Kalachuri Chedi era, as has been done by Mirashi and many others. And the entire chronology has been determined by inscriptions of the local ruler Trikutaka, paleography, and that of Ajanta inscription of Varahadeva and Upendragupta during Vakataka King Harishena's rule. Now, interestingly, in 1967, Shobna Gokhale read the missing these things. I mean, in 67, she published the inscription, reading of the inscription of the Hiseburala inscription of Devsena, which is dated to 458 AD or CE, because it is the Shaka era is categorically mentioned, and this helped Walter Spink in his postulation that Harishena's reign began in 462 AD or CE, the shifting the discussion on the short chronology and linked with the downfall of the Vakatakas. And then the period of disruption has been heavily emphasized in his writings, and the reason of disruption was assigned to the conflict between the two feudatory kings, that is Upendra Gupta and the Ashmaka king. So they categorize that it is a conflict between the Rishikas and the Ashmakas. Actually speaking, Rishika was not a territory in which Ajanta is located. Rather, it is a territory of Alaka, and it is mentioned in the Sutta Nipat. It says that Alakassa Patithane, and that the Ashmaka and Alaka are the two territories which is divided by river Godavari. And Ashmaka was a very big region, very big territory. The entire Telangana and till Andhra was the boundary of Ashmaka Desha. So that is why it was named under the Solasa Mahajanapadas. So that's a very interesting evidences we get, the literary evidences we get. Now, this particular inscription which I want you to note is there in the cave number 16, and it says that Harirama Harasmarena Dukkanti Harisheno Harivikrama Pratapaha Sa Kuntala Avanti Kalinga Kosala Trikuta Latandra -- Janiman. So the word Andhra is Andhra, and there are missing words, and these missing words were read by Shobna Gokhale as Aparanta, Latandra Aparanta. That is how she read those missing words, whereas Brahmadendra Deshpande contested that. And then this reading of the inscription by Shobna Gokhale helped Walter Spink's thesis more decisively, because the 495 AD we have, I mean, the dating of the Trikutaka inscription as proposed by Mirashi was 495 AD, and therefore Spink postulated that the terminating era for the Vakatakas is 495 AD or CE. And we also have to be very cautious when it comes to the writing of the Prashasti. So for example, Malwa King Chandravarman, Mandsaur inscriptions, stone pillar inscriptions, it says that he ruled from some Malwa till Hindasagar, I mean, which is not a reality at all. So one has to see the poetic imaginations in those inscriptions. And then the word Vijitya, which is found in earlier line, does not get mentioned in this particular line, that which can be said that yes, the Harishena won this territory. It simply says Jani Man, and the word Jani Man is not a Sanskrit word, and this inscription itself is not in a complete Sanskrit. That is also a very problematic issue. So the Jani Man can only be understood as Jan Lo, that you should take note of things, nothing more than that. And we have checked in the scriptorium of Deccan College that we did not get this word. So this is how it acts. It adds. So Ajanta was in Mulaka region, and Upendra Gupta must be the local ruler of Ajanta. So that is how he reduced everything to from 462 to 478 and that kind of a date bracket. And Dashakumara Charita has a lot of problems. Let me tell you something that, Dashakumara Charita talks about the Ashmaka king, the fighting against, and then the very interesting thing which is recorded in Dashakumara Charita, and that says that the battle was fought. One version says the river Narmada. Another version says Varda, which is identified with Vardha, so river Vardha. Now, in both the cases, even if you want to fight a battle on the bank of Narmada, you have to cross the Vakataka territory. It is as simple as this. Then when it comes to the Vardha, of course, it was Vakatakas were controlling the entire Vardha valley. So that means crossing the territory of the Vakatakas. And why a king of Ashmaka and Kuntala would travel with other kings to travel to Vardha, river Vardha, and with the river Narmada to fight a battle against the Vidarbha king. I mean, this is absolute shamelessness, I should say. I'm not saying the ways in which the story is written. What I'm saying is the ways in which shamelessness is exercised by our great historians and the Sanskritists when it comes to the application of these narratives, and they took it as a part of the historical reality and applied it as it is. So that includes even Spink, Mirashi, and a lot of other people. So, and another concept is that golden age theory. Everything is produced in 5th and 6th century CE, which is very ridiculous. This whole idea of golden age has destroyed our scholarship, I must say. Like scholars like Khandalwala, Deshpande, Brahmananda Deshpande, Jamkhedkar, Joanna William completely disagrees with the Spink. But however, all these people never bothered to put forth any art historical evidences before Spink, and therefore Spink hardly cared about his these things. Then there is a complete disregard to relation between the Vidarbha and Ajanta sculptural convention. So this becomes another problem with the Spink. Then Stern also made some important contributions. I'm not going to go into the details of all those things, but let me tell you this important. I mean, I would like to draw your attention to this Vada inscription of the Konkan Mauryas, which mentions the date Shake 322, that is 400 CE. And thus the Traikutakas will have to be dated before the Konkan Mauryas. So, if the 400 AD is the date of Konkan Maurya, then the date of the Traikutakas will have to be before 400 AD. This is a very simple calculation I'm making. And Dilip Rajgur's work clearly shows that the Traikutaka coins, they follow the format of the Kshatrapas and the Satvana coins, late Satvana coins. And he said that it is possible unless until they immediately become the ruler in that area. And this possibility is further, I feel, that proved or gets approved or you get an evidence for this possibility in the form of Vada inscription of the Konkan Maurya. This Vada inscription of Konkan Maurya is published by K.V. Ramesh in one of the Epigraphia Indica. I don't remember the volume number, but I had showed it to Professor Gokhale when she was alive, Shobna Gokhale, and she said, "Are खरंच रे ते सत्य आहे इथे लिहिलेलं आहे शके 322," and he is very right. That is what she immediately could make out, immediately could read. Well, it was always a pleasure to have a conversation with her, and I have wonderful memories of these people, likes of Shobna Gokhale, Dhawadekar sir, and Deshpande sir, and many people. So that is how you have to understand that the the whole chronology in the area. So thus, unless until the dates of the Trikuta cave inscriptions are considered in the Shaka area, the political chronology sequence cannot be established in the proper manner. And this is how, what according to the Shaka era, the date and the calculation of Surat, Kaneri, and Matan plate of the Traikutakas, and if we put it into Shaka era, then these are the kind of dates we get. So if we go by the Shaka era, obviously it becomes the early 4th century CE, or the first half of the 4th century CE. Then this another thing which I would like to mention here is that the development for the Mahayana caves in Western Deccan has always been traced outside the Western Deccan, and this becomes extremely problematic precisely because everything, I mean, wherever there is a Buddha image, wherever there is this Mahayana face, there is a standard idea and understanding that, oh, it has to be 5th century CE and it is a golden period. So everything everything good that emerges in India is always associated with the Gupta period, which is considered to be golden period. And since the Vakatakas were the contemporary rulers of the Guptas, so that is how the term Gupta Vakataka age or the Gupta Vakataka period as the golden age of Indian history has been made. I mean, this is again a very typical Brahmanical cultural nationalism that goes in the interpretative aspects of the past. And we have to come out of those ideas. And we have to see what are the possibilities and can there be a golden age? I mean, it's all nonsense that to say that it was a golden age. So that's how you have to see the other sites as well, like Kaneri, Mahad, and Kondivite. These are important sites, how you can understand through these things. So there are 3 phases of Ajanta caves. The early phase, which is of 2nd and 4th century BC. The middle phase, there is a 3rd century CE. And the last phase, that is early 5th century CE and the late 5th century CE. So the last phase of Ajanta can be divided into 2 distinct phases, that the early Mahayana caves and the sculptures, and the later Mahayana caves and the sculptures. And the later phase is distinctly marked by the influence of the Vidarbha sculptural traditions. So once you observe that, then you can easily understand as to how you can divide the later Mahayana phase in Ajanta. And moreover, also one can observe that how the Guild of Western Deccan were constantly working at the site, and when they interact with Vidarbha sculptors, how those things also get incorporated. And let me also say that this is my observation. What I've noticed is that it is the sculpting of the Buddha image becomes an exclusive right of the Western Deccan sculptors. I don't see sculpting of the Buddha image being done by the Vidarbha sculptors, whereas the Vidarbha sculptors were doing all the ancillary sculptures around the Buddha image, but the sculpting of the main Buddha image becomes an exclusive right of the Western Deccan artisan guild. And you will notice that heaviness of volume, pushing forward energy, that robust physicality. These are some of the important elements or achievements, formalistic achievements of the Western Deccan guild, which continues even in the Ajanta caves. So I will go into detail. This is general view, and then this is cave 9 and 10, which is, I mean, there is absolutely no dispute as far as the early phase of Ajanta is concerned. Everybody agrees to the same date, except Walter Spink, who says that I mean, he doesn't want to accept 2nd century BC as a date in the Western Deccan cave. So for him everything begins in 1st century BC, and this he has written in an article. This was also part of his thesis. However, let me also tell you something, that the inscription which is mentioned on the facade of this cave, Vasiti Putta, Gharamukha. Now, who is this Vasiti Putta? We don't know, but some, like some people try to link it with the Satvahana king Vasitiputta, but the chronology did not fit, and therefore they gave up that idea. However, recently one coin was found in Washim district of Maharashtra, which was part of Akola district earlier in the Vidarbha area. And Wasim is, ancient name of the Wasim is Vatsagulma. And there is one taluka place where this coin was found, and it says the name inscribed, it is Vasitiputta. So Professor Chandrasekhar Gupta, who worked in Department of Archaeology in Nagpur University, linked this Vasiti with this Vasist mentioned in this particular inscription. So therefore, we have to see these linkages. And also there is a story in Marathi in irony about the king Vasitha, and which is an interesting narrative. So quite likely that Vasitha must be a local ruler there ruling in 2nd century BC. That possibility cannot be denied. So these are the various possibilities, and these possibilities are very important to explore how we can construct the picture of Ajanta Cave. So this is the interior of the cave 10, and then these are the ceiling paintings, which was made later. I mean, the Buddha images were added late. This is a later addition. And then there are number of those figures which do not follow the conventions of late 5th century CE, and therefore they will have to be dated earlier, maybe sometime mid 3rd century CE or so. Then cave number 9 is more challenging. Let me also tell you, I mean, I have not put the image here. There is a Shaddanta Jataka, and Shaddanta Jataka, the long narrative is that of the Shaddanta Jataka, and that is the longest narrative we have, pictorial narrative. And at the end of the narrative, there is the king and queen are shown going to the Chaityagraha. Now, Jataka do not mention anything about this, but interestingly, we have a very good evidence that comes from Shanza's writing, and he says that the Shaddanta Stupa was existing in Sarnath. So the Bodhisattva heroes were revered by the construction of the stupa. And he also mentions stupa for Shibi, Shasha, and some other heroes of the Bodhisattva Jatakas at various places. So very few places are mentioned, and very few such stupas are mentioned by Shanza when he visited India. So this particular phenomenon might have been done sometime by 3rd century BC or so, and that is how we have the proliferation of such stupas at some places. That is how we have to understand this particular part of the narrative. And whereas when it comes to the cave number 16, that narrative is it follows the story in the Haribhatta Jatakmala, which has been beautifully analyzed by Shingloff. So cave number 9 is more challenging, and especially the painting part, because there are various phases of painting, and this is all typical 5th century CE, whereas these are typical 1st century BC. And then these Buddha images on the pillar can be dated sometime in mid 3rd century CE or so. So these are various examples to show you a very different date of the paintings, and therefore the chronological position also needs to be understood on those lines. So here are the images which do not fall or do not follow the pictorial tradition of late 5th century CE or 5th century CE in general. And therefore, they will have to be dated before 5th century CE. And Madanjit Singh, in his book on Ajanta mural, has also noted this particular factor and said that these must be the early works, and these early, but how early? I mean, there is a postulation of 3rd century CE as a date bracket, which is a likely possibility. Then we have this distinct phase of sculpting separate Buddha image that happens in cave number 8, as well as this is also observed in cave number in Kanheri and Kondivite caves. And this is cave number 11 and paintings in cave number 10 showing the early date. So so I don't want to now one has to raise this question of how far this whole idea of late 5th century CE becomes can be contested on the grounds of the visual evidences. So we have in Kanheri the earliest Buddha image, which is dated to late 2nd century CE, and this is located in Mumbai, which has 108 caves. And these are the early caves. So you have to note the stylistic conventions of these images and then compare these stylistic conventions with the images that are produced in Kanheri itself. So once you do a contour drawings of these images and then and then compare them with the images that are excavated in Kanheri itself, you do see a kind of a link between the two. Now this image in cave number 3, which also has an inscription, and the paleography is more like a Trikutaka inscription. So therefore, it has to be dated by around 400 AD, and or earlier than that, is early 4th century CE, and then see the images accordingly. So the art historians have assigned these images to 5th century CE, and one of the reasons given in the transparent drapery and smoothness of the image tradition based on Northern Indian Buddhist image convention, especially at Sarnath. But here we have these images where there is a transparent drapery. So that happened late 2nd century CE itself in Western Deccan. So therefore, that something is coming from Sarnath, that this kind of, these are the very, these are the kind of ideas that cannot be accepted in the light of these evidences. Then you also have a lot of images in cave number 2 at Kanheri, and they bears inscription mentioning the patron as the Buddhist monk. Paleography of the inscription is close to the inscription of the Trikutakas, and therefore they will have to be dated not to the 5th century CE, but early 4th century CE, something like 323 or 320, and so on and so forth. So these inscriptions cannot be dated in the late 5th century CE because an inscription near Mumbai area belonging to Konkan Maurya, which I talked about, which mentions the date of Shake 322, that is 400 AD, and therefore dates of the Trikutakas will have to be dated earlier than the Konkan Mauryas. The images in cave number 2 and cave number 3 at Kanheri, they will have to be considered in early 4th century CE, and the pictorial conventions are developed from the earlier pillar images. These are some of the important evidences, and then these images were carved in the 4th century CE, and the same date needs to be applied at Ajanta. There are a number of images on the exterior of cave number 9 and 10, and especially these kind of Buddha images, whether they are the representation of the Shakyamuni Buddhas or they are the representation of the Adi Buddhas. So they are the representations of the Pancha Buddhas, among the Pancha Buddhas. So the Pancha Buddha imagery has no fixity in its iconography in the earlier times. It gets fixed only in the later times and not in the early times. And we do have the evidences of these Pancha Buddha imageries getting synchronized even in the 1st and 2nd century CE in the lintels of the Kushana periods, and also we do have the lintels, the images around that time in northern India. So we have to rethink the possibility. Similarly, this whole idea of the emergence of Buddha image also needs to be rethought. Say, for example, the Kuddaka Patha, which says that Buddha Dhammacha Sangha Sugata Tanubhava Dhatu Dhatu Gabbe Lankayang Jam Buddhipe Tidasa Parvare Nagaloke Chatupe. That I salute to all the stupas which are there in the Nagaloka, in heaven, and in the Jambudvipa and Sri Lanka and all, that I consider them as the representation of the Buddha. It is very categorically said. And these chants actually come from the collected from the other Nikayas. So that has a very interesting story. But what is important is to understand these ideas of representation and how the Buddha image gets immersed. And at the same time, the pictographic conventions or the formulas were already available that can be seen in the Bodh Gaya relief, which is dated to 2nd century BC. And that is how the growth of the Buddha image has a different trajectory. Now, these are the simple evidences. We have the Buddha images even on the facade of cave number 9 at Ajanta. So this is cave number 9, and this is cave number 3 at Kaneri, and it shows there is a closeness in their pictorial conventions. Then we already said about the painted Buddha images, so I don't want to go into those details. And number of those Buddha images has to be dated on different timeline. And then the pillar of cave number 10 signifying 3rd century CE as a possible date. And then we have this particular cave which has number of paintings. So the paintings are of 1st century BC, 3rd century CE, and the 5th century CE. So all the 3 phases are observed in cave number 9 of Ajanta. So this is what the cave number 9 is. And then the next phase of development is observed in cave number 11 and 15. So this is cave number 11, which is adjacent to cave number 10. And this facade is derived from Panhali Kaji cave, cave number 6. So one can see the how closeness is there. So that means the tradition really went on for a very long time in Western Deccan. And then these are the recessed door frames which are also observed in Kondivite caves. And then there are Adi Buddha paintings and all. And then there is a Padmapani, Vajrapani. Now we have to closely observe the conventions of these paintings. Can they really be date bracketed contemporary to cave number 1, 2, 16, and 17 and 20? This is hugely problematic, and therefore we need to have a very minute analysis in the context of these images. So then in the interior is a Buddha image, and then you see that on one side there are no cells were made because it would destroy cave number 10, and therefore it was not made. And then as far as these interior pillars are concerned, the Kondivite cave 4 also has similar interior pillars. And they are not the excavations which can be dated to 5th century CE. Rather, they are earlier. And this is how the tradition of Ajanta also continues. And then further, this particular image type is very close to what we have seen the pictorial conventions that get developed at Kaneri. So one can see the broadness in the shoulders, which is proportionately carved. Then they are not that broad. You know, when you see the cylindrical nature of the torso itself, and the plain drapery in this sculpture is noteworthy, and the overall outline of the figure is sharply delineated, and hence this image may be dated to mid 4th century CE. We do have the emergence of the devotee figure, and these devotee figures are also there in Kaneri. Then similarly, you see the dwarf images. That chubbiness, the softness and sweetness is quite different than what you see in cave number 16 images. So you have to see how the Vidarbha sculptural conventions played an important role in that period, whereas earlier you see the softness and sweetness that baby skin which is there in these particular caves, and also see the sculptures that have been carved in Kuda and Kaneri. So there are those similarities which are very important to trace. And then having a production of Path or not becomes a exclusive these things of exclusive right of the monks. And it cannot be attributed to any one particular reason. There may be a lack of patronage, there may not be a patronage, and they decided not to have the Pradakshina Patha itself. And if that is the case, that okay, fine. I mean, Walter Spink would say that, oh, they were working, and because of the war between the Rishika and Ashmoka, all these sculptors who were working, they ran away. I mean, that's a very standard narrative he wrote. So what was his purpose, especially this particular chamber inside the cave, is difficult to understand, but it shows that perhaps an attempt was made to create a room besides the shrine chamber. It is a unique example in Ajanta Caves itself. Then unfinished nature maybe from the patronage and non-utility, or at the behest of the monks, and circumambulation may not be necessary all the time. And you will also notice that there is no circumambulation even in cave number 17 and cave number 1. So you can't say that every cave has to have a circumambulation when it comes to the design of the Chaitya Vihara cave, which is a combination of the Vihara and the Chaityas and the Chaitya. Then we have this cave. So now I come to cave number 15 and again see these things, which is completely different and does not follow the conventions of 5th century CE. So the protrusion of the lips is not wide, neck is slightly more elongated than the Buddha images in cave number 11. The torso is slender and stands straight. Shoulders are not heavy and broad. Muscles are tightened. Drapery is transparent. Contours are diffused, giving the effect of sweeping line. The image stick to the wall plane and large halo. Transparent drapery covering both the shoulders of the Buddha image is often attributed to the northern tradition, especially of Mathura and Sarnath. However, Western Deccan had already developed these conventions at Kanheri cave number 3, which is dated to late 2nd century CE. And then we come to cave number 6, lower level. So these images of cave number 6, lower level, is that of the early date. And the one can see the shrine image is completely finished, whereas one can see even the paintings and all. But however, the upper story has a completely different completely different, and has number of places where the excavation remain unfinished, and this made Walter Spink to find out the reason as to why it happened, and therefore he conveniently came up with this idea that probably because of the conflict between the two kings, there was a disruption of the art activity in this particular cave. But let me tell you, reworking of the cave is possible and very, very difficult to make out whether the cave has been reworked. Only in few cases, say for example in Karla, where the cave gets extended inside, that can be seen because of the little bit of a leftover part on the edge of the previously existing wall. But if it is plastered, then it is very difficult to make out, and one can see that it becomes one part. Now these images on the upper level are very interesting, and they offer very different this thing. So there is this snake guardian image and the flag bearer image, and Deshpandeji had put a bamboo here, and it came down and exactly like it was holding. So this is a very interesting thing which he had done, and shared this observation with many of us. And one can see how the treatment of the torso is very different, and the stylistic features do not match with the late 5th century images in Ajanta itself. So this is the details of these images, and how this entire portion of the facade gets reconstructed. And then there are shrinelets. Now these shrinelets, which have the Buddha images, again cannot be categorized under the 5th century CE conventions, and one can read it very carefully. And then the images of Avalokiteshvara, probably the first in Ajanta Caves, sculpted in cave number 6 upper level, which has a pronounced volume, broad shoulder, well-defined contours are important qualities, and it can be compared with the images near the facade. So when you compare with these facade images, you do observe some kind of a correlation. And then this portion gets reworked by ASI. So the ethyl silicate is used as a part of the conservation measure. Nowadays, they have stopped using ethyl silicate. I don't know why, only they can explain, but it is a very expensive material, the ethyl silicate. It has to be imported from Germany. And the import cost and everything, even the making of that ethyl silicate has increased, enormously increased, even in the European market. Then these are the incomplete images, and Spink has this he called it as intrusive images, and that observation with regarding to the intrusive images are fabulous as far as Spink's work is concerned. However, when he clubbed them into explaining chronology, and there it becomes, I mean, he completely dwindles. He completely becomes reductionist. That cannot be taken for granted all the time. And then there is this particular shrine which is located on this corner of the cave, which has a T-shaped door, and it gets derived from what we observed in Kondivite. Exactly, like a Kondivite. And there are interesting paintings. Now, when you see the torso of these paintings, you will immediately recall the images which are there on the facade, especially that snake guardian and the other image, even on the on the exterior of the same cave. So there is this closeness, and based on that, we will have to date these images to something around 4th century rather than the 5th century CE. So these are the very important body of evidences which are quite different than what you observe in late 5th century CE. And painting becomes a huge challenge in Ajanta. What I have noticed recently, I'd been there, I spent a lot of time, and one can see certain pictographic formulas that were constantly used, and especially you can observe this in cave number 1, cave number 2, cave number 16, and cave number 17. These are the 4 important caves where such formulas, pictorial formulas, have been applied, and one can read those pictorial formulas. Let me also draw your attention to one book produced by Professor Ratan Parimu while he was in LD Museum. He found out many of those drawings which are there as a part of the picture formula. So how king should be represented, what could be the attributes, how this could be this, how that could be this. So there are those, it is something like a picture book, the iconography of the picture book. And this picture book, I mean, in the medieval tradition, it was very much there. And so one can see that, yes, there is a possibility of having that kind of a picture book tradition. And there is a very good work by, very good article by Srikant, what's his name? Srikant Pradhan, who worked as a photographer in Deccan College, Pune, not photographer, some assistant, some assistant, art assistant in Deccan College, and who wrote a very good article on the pictorial compositions of Amravati sculptures and that of Ajanta painting. So quite likely that those formulas were existing, those pictographic formulas were existing, and the artisans were using that those formulas. So back of the Buddha, back as far as the back of the painting of this shrine is concerned, it was complete. It has a different chronological indicator, and it is not made in one go. And you can see this broadness of the shoulder, the hugeness. I mean, these are all the typical late 5th century AD qualities. And then I come to this, just collected these Buddha images, and one can see how these Buddha images are completely different than the images that have been produced in late 5th century CE. And one can see how these this set of images are different than this set of images, and this goes more close to the conventions that get developed in late 5th century CE. And whereas these images, they do not belong to that convention, pictorial conventions of late 5th century CE. So you can see how through the stylistic method, one can understand the chronology of the caves. So these are some of the caves, and then subsequent uh, caves can be seen when there is an influence of the Vidarbha sculpture. So these are some of the Vidarbha sculptures which are found in Mansar and also in Ramtek, and a very interesting body of sculpture. So you can see the grace of this Buddha image Bodhisattva image in cave number 1, and how it gets derived from the Vidarbha sculptural tradition. And these Vidarbha sculptures are earlier than these Ajanta caves. So everybody agrees. I mean, there is no dispute whether it is Jamshedkar, whether it is anyone, whether it is Chandrasekhar Gupta, whether it is even Ajay Mitra Shastri or Priyadarshi Khobragade, or many of those people who have worked on Vidarbha sculptures, or even recently Rohit Uke has also worked on those, which he dated them earlier. And even it also gets mentioned by Deepak Kannal in his book, and Deepak Kannal has tried to see the migration of the artist guild from Andhra to Vidarbha, but somehow that possibility, I find it very difficult to imagine. However, those pictographic elements are very important to observe. However, I would say that the conventions which are observed in Ramtek, Mansar, and Paunar, you will find them in Ajanta. So you can see the closeness, and then the chubbiness, this kind of a figure of Mansar you will observe, and then this Paunar Ganga image. When you make a drawings of Paunar images, you will find that many of those images in Ajanta, the painted images, have the similar grace and similar body structure. So one can see this one and this one very close to each other, and that is how that closeness can be observed. So this is cave number 16, and then there are these images of Buddha images, and the main Buddha image does not show the impact of the Vidarbha sculptures, but these attendant images very much show the impact of the Vidarbha sculptures. There are also other images where one can see that impact, and see this one. This is from Mansar, this is from Ajanta, and you do find the similar figure even in paintings at other places, not only in cave number 17, but also in cave number, I suppose, 2. Then we also have these images which are very interesting, which has an impact of Vidarbha sculptures, mainly these facade images of Shankanidhi, Padmanidhi, and then how closeness one can see these things, and then interior of the hall. And the caves were plastered and painted, including these ones, and the painting of the walls of the cave. And see these images. The grace is exactly like Paunar images, these ones, or even these ones. So that's how one has to see. And these are just I put it as a collage, and one can see yourself how closely they are with each other, especially in case of the pictorial conventions. Then we also have cave number 20, which is quite an interesting evidence, and one can see the unfinished nature of the lower part. Now the cave patronized by Upendra Gupta. Now, how can you say that the local king stopped patronage and because of the war it stopped? But it would have been completed earlier also. Whereas the opposite side, especially this attendant figure, is a painted one. So one is a painted one, another is a non-painted one. I mean, the lower part remain unfinished, and they made use of the clay for the protrusion of the anatomy surface, and then it would be plastered and painted. So it becomes an integral part of the rock itself. So that is a kind of mechanism that have been used in Ajanta Caves, and therefore these these things clearly show that there are different phases of work and not the ways in which Walter Spink has constructed the story of Ajanta Caves. So this is just, I would like to end with this particular slide, which are there. This is the painting on the ceiling of the cave, whereas these are the paintings in cave number 1. And one can notice how the treatment of volume and the space is used in Ajanta paintings in order to claim its refinement, in order to see the a very fabulous pictorial quality. And if you see closely, I mean, I have not put those images, you will notice that the linearity does not become a concern. Rather, the linearity is used in order to delineate the volume, and the idea of treatment of volume is done through the linear means and also through the shading of the line. So this becomes a very distinct feature of Ajanta paintings, which has a different layers of chronology. So thank you very much, and I close my PPT, and I will be happy to answer all your queries and the questions.
Thank you, Professor Aloni. I'm not sure if Professor Prabhakar is still here, because he had to leave, as we remember, and I was going to take over from him at the end of the talk. So thank you so much, first of all, for this very enriching talk. You have kind of laid bare, the threads, the intricate threads of looking at this topic from so many different angles. And I mean, it was overarching, at the same time very intricate. You went into so many arguments and contestations, and you've covered such a vast period of history in such a short time. And we had a very good audience today for this talk. After a long time, we had almost 180 participants listening to you. And so I request them to type their questions or comments if they have any, and we will take the most pertinent ones, because sometimes there are many questions, and we're going to do next.
Yeah. Let me answer some of the questions which I've seen in the chat box.
Yeah, can I just? Is it okay if I read them out and then?
No. I will just. There is one. This thing is that what is the identification of Rishika region? Can that be taken as area of south of Satpura range? See, the question is, it has to be clubbed with the other body of evidences, like the inscriptional evidences. We, in the area of Deccan, especially in this part, you have the inscriptional as well as the literary evidences, and that correlate with each other very well. So that is the way to identify. But certainly the area, see what Mirashi does is that he considered that that Rishika, which is there even in the inscriptional evidence, must be this particular area, and that he gives some Sanskrit text reference, which is not very convincing. And therefore that cannot be taken as a historical reality. Then there is another. Will you share the presentation? Well, webinar will be uploaded. So
yeah, it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. And
then there is one important, I mean, very distinct. There are a couple of questions which I have already explained in my presentations itself. And then there is one question which says that, is there a connection between Bagh and Ajanta? Yes, there is a connection, but that connection goes only in the late period, it has nothing to do with the early phase, so-called, or what I would like to call it as the 3rd and 4th century CE activity at Ajanta. And I have already wrote a chapter in my book on this particular phase, so you can read that. Then well, the name of the Rishika, I already talked about that, but however, let me tell you that the Pali text mentions Ashmaka and the Mulaka are the two important things, and Mulaka later according to Mirashi, becomes a Rishika. But these are the contesting categories. I'm not very sure about it. You yourself can go and see, examine these things. Then cave 29 sculptural style. Well, the cave number 29 is incomplete. It is on the top. So it doesn't have a sculptural embellishment, and certainly it was made, started after cave number 26. That is for very sure. And Spink has written an article on that. And except the dating, I go with his ideas. However, Deshpande ji also wrote on it, and the Deshpande's chronological indicators are much more sophisticated than the Spink's indicators of chronology. Then this tempera technique and all, I mean, see, the technique of Ajanta paintings has been extensively written on, and you can read Ganesh Halol's articles. You can also read a lot of other articles which are there, and I don't have to, I mean, there is nothing new I can add on it. But one thing I can say, that whether the real question in the plaster is the calcium carbonate has been used or not, and that for that you require a chemical analysis. So it is up to the ASI to do that kind of analysis. Then there are the Yaksha and Kuber are very close. I mean, there is a Kuber figure even in, and that also becomes part of the Yaksha figure in the Buddhist iconography. And Ellora is a fantastic example where you have a Kuber and you have a Kuber Yaksha. So there are two competitive iconographies that emerged in Ellora, and that has been beautifully mentioned in Marathi article by M.N. Deshpande on Ellora. It was published in one of the Diwali Anka of some Marathwada or something, and you should go and find out that. Then there are this and there is no influence of Pitalkhora on Ajanta. Absolutely no influence on Pitalkhora on Ajanta. I mean, how can you say that? Some of the caves, the early phase of Pitalkhora and Ajanta were almost contemporary with each other. And whether the artisans were Buddhist or not, we don't know. We don't have such idea. But let me tell you, even today, any artist who knows the craft can make the image of Shiva, can make the image of Vishnu, as well as can make the image of Buddha the way he is directed to make. So that is the only thing I can answer. Unless until we have these definite evidences, we can't say anything. But yes, there is a likely possibility that as far as some of the tradition which is there in the Himalayan region, that the Shramners are the one who are practicing art in the Buddhist monasteries of Tibet, Nepal. And if we take that as an act of or as an evidence, but then it is very difficult when it comes to Ajanta, because when you see Vidarbha sculptures are of a diverse religious backgrounds. So mainly they are Vaishnavite images and also the Buddhist images. Both the things are there. But those conventions get followed at Ajanta that shows the migration of artisan communities to Ajanta. That much I can say. But whether every artist was Buddhist or not, we don't know. We can't say definitely. But these are some of the anthropological evidences are available. But however, not necessary that the anthropological evidences will also all the time will fix that historicity. Another example I tell you, the Vadar community in Maharashtra who are involved in the stone carving, you ask them to make a copy of the sculpture, they will do it. But if you simply say, you make this sculpture, they will not be able to make the sculpture unless until you give them some kind of a visual evidence. So the Archaeological Survey of India and the State Archaeology Department, whenever they want reconstruction of some image, they always employ these Vadar community sculptors and they give them the photo, or they will show, oh, this part is gone and you have to reconstruct that part and it will be like this, and they will give you the exact copy. So this is a training process. Another evidence I tell you, R.N. Mishra has extensively worked on the Malwa temples, and he plotted some of the artisan guilds and their insignias. And he observed that some guilds came far off. So there is an interesting record in which I don't remember where the evidences he quote in that particular book, but he observes that even if you migrate from one area to another area, you have to produce a work within that pictorial traditions which the Sthapati has designed. So this is applicable when it comes to the temple tradition. However, this phenomenon is not applicable when it comes to the cave sculptural tradition, and you can see that there is a marked visible evidence of the Vidarbha sculpture in Ajanta Caves. Yeah. Yeah. Now over to you. You tell me who has raised the hands and what questions they have.
I saw some raised hands, but I'll request them to type the questions because sometimes, as you said, the answers have already been given or there are repetitive questions. So we don't want to take them again and again. We're looking for unique ones. So I see that
almost all the caves were plastered and painted. Let me also tell you, there is a general question which says that whether the caves, whether the all Buddhist caves had painting like Ajanta and Pitalkhora. Yes, all the Buddhist caves were plastered and painted and must be having paintings as well. If you see very, very old photograph of Junnar Turja cave and the Bhaja Chaityagraha, they do show the evidence of having Buddha images, painted Buddha images. So they were very much there, and also you get to see the leftover part of the plaster in many of those caves. Some caves had a thick plaster, some caves had a very thin lime plaster. So then there is this question by Asha who says that in the
I
cave.
was going to take that up.
Yeah, notice some small angle-like figures above the main sculpture. Would you please explain as to what those figures represent? Well, these are part of the decorative sculptures, and there are, often people would like to identify them something like Ganga Yamuna sculpture, which is a very standard kind of a practice which is found in central India or elsewhere in the Brahmanical sculptural tradition, but in the Buddhist tradition, it cannot be. Then there are some people who would like to identify that as it is a representation of the Mahamaya. That cannot be true, because these became a very generic sculptures, and these generic sculptures need to be taken into account as a part of the pictorial vocabulary, but it does not have that kind of a strict religious meanings. Then there are no systematic studies made on the door frames of Ajanta and Kanheri. I made certain things. I pointed out the evidences of at Kondivite. Kondivite caves are very important to understand the proliferation of the decoration of the door frames in Ajanta. So every time people think of the Gupta territory, and then they think that they came from there and made these decorations. That cannot be taken for granted.
There's a
Then
question
also
on,
yeah.
There's a question on the study or work done on the donors from Ajanta and Kanheri caves.
There are inscriptional evidences, and they are Kanheri inscriptions are greatly studied by Shobna Gokhale, and even I have written a book on patronage. I have written a chapter in my book on patronage, special patronage, and you can see that how there are number of patrons which are mentioned, and I also, like till Ajanta I considered them, but of course I have not touched upon the late phase of Ajanta because it was not part of my inquiry, and certainly I am in the process of writing a book exclusively on Ajanta. I don't know when I'm going to finish. So so that is a magnum opus task, because every time I go and see, I get too many things jumble.
I'm sure everyone is looking forward to that. You made the announcement, so you have to keep the promise.
I hope so. Then of course I already talked about the Vidarbha sculptures extensively and their influence on Ajanta Caves, so I don't have to repeat between these things.
So there is a question on is there a rule or an agama as to when a standing or seated or lying Buddha should be sculpted? Is there any rule or agama as to when a standing or a seated or a lying Buddha should be sculpted?
Well, not 9 Buddha. There is the standard 7 Manishi Buddhas, which are all the time represented. And I mean, see, that's how again this whole idea of Mahayana and the Theravadian tradition comes in. Everybody says that it is a product of the Mahayana tradition, but that is not true. Even the Theravadian caves, or there is a representation of this Manushi Buddhas, the past Adi Buddhas, and that is there even in the Digha Nikaya, and that tradition continues. The pictorial tradition continues even in the later times, and it gets depicted all the time. That's standard 7-1. And then the as far as this Elora is concerned, you have the standard 7, and then the 7 is one is Adi Buddhas, and then there are the other Buddha images. So the Vajrasattva and the Vajraratha, they get added as a part of the Pancha Buddha imagery, and that becomes the 7-1. And then there is an addition of further one Buddha image, but that you get to see only in the Tibetan traditions and not in these things. So the
any trade route close to the cave?
Yeah.
So there's a question on the trade route.
What question can you read?
This is by Pooja Yadav. Is there any trade route close to the Ajanta Cave?
Yes, it was very much there. From Bahal, it was going to Paitan. So the caves were, now let me tell you, this is again a little bit of misnomer, in the sense that the caves were exactly located on trade route. No, that's not that is not a possibility. Caves get located close to the settlement first. Settlement becomes very important, because you can survive only on settlement. And then comes your trade route. So the trade route is a secondary thing, whereas the settlement becomes very important. And how long that goes on, that also matters a lot. Say, for example, the life of, like, you can understand the caves were active even 9th and 10th century CE in Kaneri, and this information comes through the body of the inscriptional evidences we have. Whereas in Ajanta, we don't get the late phase, and especially there is an inscription in cave number 26, which is dated much later, which is dated to 6th century CE on the paleographic ground, that shows that there was a continuation of the activities. But how long it continued, we don't know, because we don't have any further activities in Ajanta. And then when exactly it declined, that also we don't know. So the decline of these sites has multiple reasons, and it differs from one area to another area. So you cannot have a standard one reason for the decline of these sites. However, there is a feud between the Brahmanism and Buddhism that played an important role in case of destruction of the decline of the Buddhist site. And many times when the site declines, after say some years, the Kavlaka Apalikas come and start residing in that site. Because the Kavlaka Apalikas are the one, wo to sara bhoot pret wale hai na, they are all bhoot pret types. So it becomes a deserted site, and then it becomes a bhutatki. In Marathi, we use the word bhutatki. So they become part of that, and they start inhabiting it. However, there are also the sites where you can see the conversion of the Buddhist site taking place in 17, 18, 19, and 20th century. That phenomenon is also there.
I see two other interesting questions, two or three, and I think that with that, after that we can end. So one is, there was an excavation that was done on the right bank of Agora, where a monastery was exposed. But where do you place this work chronologically with respect to the cave?
See, the brick structures that are found there they are of a different period, and then they also found one sculpture, small tiny sculpture of Durga, of Devi. That part is also there. Quite likely that those structures were there right from the beginning. And as I said, that every cave had a different approach through the river bed, and that particular route must have been used even in ancient time. That possibility is very much there. However, the Buddhist monasteries always dependent more on the public patronage rather than the royal patronage. In case of Ajanta, uh, it is not a direct royalty that comes. It is only the feudal lords, mainly the regional kings like Upendra Gupta, who patronized the excavation, whereas there is one Ashmuka Raja, which gets mentioned in the excavation of cave number 26. And then there is one, one name which is mentioned. So this Ashok Thosar would like to identify with that of one late Satvana king, but that becomes extremely problematic. However, Deepak Kannal observes that the sculptures on cave number 26 facade are of a little early times than the caves, the sculpture that have been carved in the inside of cave number 26. That is what his observation is. But how do you understand that particular phenomenon going there in Ajanta? That is something where you cannot have this reductionist attitude or the methodology in order to decipher the chronology, because you can keep digging the cave, you can make improvements, you can make changes. There are a number of things you can do. And there are also a number of things where you can just scoop out the rock and just cover it and plaster it and paint it. Those things are also there. Say, for example, the door frames, there are a number of unfinished caves where the door frames is very elaborately carved, whereas cave number 16 has a painted door frame. So the painting becomes a very easy means to finish the work. Sculpting takes a lot of time. That is there. I mean, it's very obvious.
Next one is, were the artists instructed by the patrons all the time, or did they do some art of their
Yes,
own?
patrons indeed had a say in the selection of the themes and all. The artisans were not in control of the selection of the theme. You will notice that the jatakas which are there, I mean, they become a very standard kind of a thing. There are a number of jatakas which are picked up from Charya Pita. Okay, this they become part of the different charyas. So and then at the same time, there are also jataka. Say for example, the Shibi Jataka. There are some 4 or 5 versions of the Shibi Jataka in Ajanta, and each one follow very different kind of a text. So the story in the Sutra Alankar is very different. The story in the Pali is very different. The story in Aryasur Jatak Mala is different. So there are a number of those versions, and you have to see those versions, which has been studied by Shinglov. But still, it has its own. Still, it needs to be studied further. I must say that it requires a very minute analysis by correlating the micro events that can be readable in the paintings of Ajanta.
So the last few questions, I'm not sure if you would like to take them, or are they repetitive?
Which one?
The last few questions.
Whether there is somebody who talked about this Vidarbha site. I mean,
yes, there are few questions.
I mentioned those sites. I mean, these are all these things.
Okay, and very quickly, let's just.
22 Baja is not. There is no connection. Baja is very much earlier, and cave number 22 is of a later times.
Okay. And where did the inspiration for these caves come from suddenly in the 2nd century BC?
The inspiration.
Suddenly the cave.
I will answer this question. Don't worry. The existence of the cave, like some natural caves, and then later on it becomes a man-made cave kind of a things, or the natural use of the natural caves are there in the Buddhist text, and you can read Vinay Pitak for that. And also the other Nikayas mention about very few places of the caves, but later on it becomes a very important tradition. And of course, during the Mauryan time, the caves, it becomes predominantly the Shramana tradition. So you have the Shraman traditions taking up the caves and making caves everywhere. So far we could not get anything that is pre-3rd century BC. So it all depends on the kind of an evidences. But yes, the caves have been the man-made, I mean, the natural caves were also inhabited by the prehistoric man. Even in the later historic man, also inhabited those caves. There are plenty of evidences, and one of the best example is Bhimbetka, where you have those rock shelters getting inhabited by even during Gupta period. So you have all kinds of evidences available. However, when it comes to the Buddhist caves, it becomes an exclusive mark, and they are very exclusive in nature, and their utility, their ways of making, both Buddhist and Jaina caves. The Jains did not go much for the excavation of the caves, but yes, the Buddhists have made it, and there has been this proliferation of the caves, and it becomes a important permanent building. Otherwise, when you make structural building, after how much life it has, so you have to understand that life. When it comes to Nalanda, see the walls, they were so thick, and that is why they could survive for such a long time till the invasion happened. Had there not been invasion, probably those walls would have survived, the way many of those walls have survived in Europe, of this cathedral, which are dated to 4th century CE. But we don't have such things. In Sanchi, we do have the existence of those pillars of the structural temple, the structural Chaitya Graha, which is dated to pre-Christian era. So and also there are walls which are there in the dated to post-Christian era. So there are a number of body of evidences. You unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. One last question, because it's a bit different from the rest. Why there is no Gajalakshmi motif that is found in Ajanta?
Because it is not there. So how can we say? We can't say ki Jabardasti banao. But there are Gajalakshmi motifs elsewhere in Western Deccan caves, and you have to be very cautious while using this understanding the Gajalakshmi motif. Whether it should be called as Gajalakshmi, that itself is very problematic. And you also need to understand the two traditions. One is a Abhisanchara ceremony, and one is a Jalabhisheka ceremony. So which are the ceremonies which are part of the Shramana traditions, that you have to understand and see the representation of that. At the same time, you also need to see the Chinese sources, because not that everything is there in our country. Number of sutra texts have been translated in Chinese, and you have to read them very carefully. I'll tell you just one small example. Buddha Charita, which is there in Sri Lanka, it only talks till the enlightenment, whereas the Sri Lankan version of the Buddha Charita talks till the death. And what Dr. Ambedkar wrote in his Buddha, in his Dhamma, that Upali's Dhamma Diksha, about this Dhamma Diksha and all, it is there in the Buddha Charita. So he made that text very much based on the events that gets mentioned in the Buddha Charita. So that's how it is done. So you have to read them very seriously. We don't have the text. We don't have, nothing is there. But we have to construct the evidences through various sources. We have to understand the evidences through various sources and then construct the historical nature or the historical narrative.
Questions are still coming, but I think we have to wrap it up at some point. So I think one common advice you can give all the listeners is that they should refer to all the scholars that you have. Would you like to take any question, or should we?
No. I just want to tell you something that, I mean, there are a couple of questions which are very generic nature. You have the story of Mara. So, there are certain narratives that get mentioned in the Vinay Pitaka. And that is why it becomes important. And you do get the repetition of those narratives in all the Buddhist sites. Similarly, text like Anguttara Nikaya, it mentions the 4 important great events in one go. So it narrates that story. And it is exactly the similar panels they get depicted in the narratives of 1st century BC, 2nd century BC, or even 3rd and 4th century CE. So it continues. So that is how one has to see. And then at the same time, as far as the there is Dr. Anuja Raj who has mentioned this, sir. I have found that most of the cave inscriptions belong to Shiva or make figure rather than a female deity, not dirty deity. What is it so? And if I'm wrong, kindly enlighten me, please. Now I don't understand. Frankly speaking, I did not understand your question first. But whatever you have written, I could what I could understand is that the affinity or the religious identification of the caves is based on the motifs which are painted, which are found in the caves itself. Say, for example, if you see cave number that where the Danti Durga inscription is there in one of the cave in Ellora. So if you see the top has the Buddha images, and that cave get converted into a Brahmanical tradition, into a Brahmanical pantheon. So there is this takeover business that goes also. Then so you have to understand these religious affinities on various sources, and you just can't, when you have a image which becomes very definite. Whereas there are number of caves which were Buddhist caves and people have put Shivlinga in it. And there are, say for example, this Shelarwadi caves, which is there on the Mumbai-Pune highway. What is that railway station? I don't remember the name of that railway station. From where you get down and go up on the hill. Now that stupa is worshipped as linga. So there is this kind of complete takeover. Then there are a number of cases where the Shivlinga or the Vitthal Rukmai images have been kept deliberately. That happened in 19th century. Not that everything happened in ancient time. Similarly, you have Shirwad images, Shirwad caves, where there is this such a deliberate attempt have been made in the colonial times or even in the pre-independence time. So all kinds of vandalism has happened in India. We can't say that we are a very cultured state or a cultured country. It's all, I mean, these are very ideas of romantic. There's a romanticism, exoticism. So you have to shun away those things and teach students that way to respect the monument, whether it is of this faith or that faith, whether it belongs to Jews, whether it belongs to Muslims, whether it belongs to Hindus, whether it belongs to Buddhists or Jain or any faith. It is a monument and a property and a heritage of Government of India. It is the property of citizen of Republic of Government of India. So you cannot just categorize them and shun them. That's the way you have to learn how to respect and study the monuments.
I think that's a very good note to end this webinar with. And I'm sorry we cannot take all the questions, but Professor has referred to many different texts and scholarships that the listeners can refer to get their answers. And of course, this webinar is going to go on YouTube very soon on our channel, and they can revisit this talk. So thank you so much, sir, for spending nearly 2 hours with us today and for patiently answering all these questions. And of course, to the listeners for logging in such huge numbers for this talk. And, we really enjoyed having you. And to our participants, we will be back again next month on the last Saturday in the evening at around 4 o'clock, as always, with another talk on another subject. And please join us for the next talk, as well as all the future talks, as long as we keep having them. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, Prabhakar and Michelle are not here to say a few words, but I'm sure they are going to. Prabhakar messaged me saying that he's absolutely loving your talk, amazing talk, and I'm sure he has questions, but he'll ask you later, maybe some other day. But once again, thank you all of you, and have a good weekend. And I think we can now end this webinar here. So
thank you very much. Thanks
you, sir.
For having me here. Thank you and giving me opportunity to answer many questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Unka.
Yeah,
Bye.
have a good
weekend.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.